Hello, I'm Dave Feinlieb, and this is Beyond the Shelf. This show is an open exploration of the people and process behind e-commerce. Through conversations with innovators in the space, we learn the stories of these leaders and their strategies for e-commerce success. You can learn more about how we're helping leading brands and retailers build content at scale and take advantage of our free content health audit at itsrapid.ai. My guest on today's show is Todd Hassenfelt, Global Digital Commerce Senior Director, Strategy and Execution at Colgate-Palmolive. Todd has a broad range of experiences across significant leadership roles in brick and mortar and e-commerce channels, as well as in both sales and marketing. Known for his ability to get things done across organizations of every size, Todd has worked with many of the world's leading brands, including Colgate, Palmolive, Hills, Elta MD, Tom's, Irish Spring, and many more. Prior to Colgate, Todd was Senior Director of E-commerce at Simple Mills and Director of Amazon Sales at Glanbia Performance Nutrition. We cover Todd's experience working at Colgate, his global perspective, and what he's focused on when it comes to product content, AI, and more. Please enjoy my conversation with Todd Hassenfelt. Well, Todd, great to see you and welcome to the show.
Thank you. I really appreciate, the opportunity to be a guest on this podcast, and just the importance of podcasts for learning in this space is so critical. So thank you for what you're doing to contribute to the learning in the industry.
Well, it's a pleasure. Take us back, if you will. How did you get your start in the space?
Well, I'll go way back to, thanking my mom and dad for giving me a great work ethic. I was that kid that was always helping out after school with the teachers, washing blackboards and trying to find any way to help, family out. I was a walk-on for college basketball at UW Green Bay. So that's a whole different experience of doing all the work, all the effort, but without the scholarship and with not a lot of playing time, which is fine. It was about making the team better. But, I am lucky overall, talking about my work experience. I've been at big companies like I am right now at Colgate and a couple others. I've been at small, 2 different startups, including Simple Mills, as you mentioned, and Glanbia, which is kind of in the middle. But yeah, sales and marketing, brick and mortar and e-commerce. I've been practitioner and global. So, seeing the different sides of things, including that brick and mortar and e-com space, I think a lot of times, correctly, organizations are trying to train their people on digital related topics. But I think there's also a need out there, maybe about training people that only know digital about the brick and mortar space. And I think, my start in this space has been just with so many talented people that have let me learn from them, let me, ask a lot of questions, and it's all about helping others. So my e-com journey, started at Glanbia. I was lucky enough, Matt Goodson took a chance on me with no e-com experience, had all brick and mortar. He was hiring his first person on the e-com team to help him, lead Amazon. And so, I had to learn fast. But that's nothing new to me, and excited to be where I am now.
That story of someone being willing to take a chance on you, I think a lot of us have had that, or if we haven't, we hope to have that. What is that? Would you unpack that? If you think back to that, what do you think he saw, and what do you think he was hoping for when he was willing to take that chance?
I think he was hoping for some help, first of all, but no, in all seriousness, someone that's which I adopted myself as I was hiring people in e-commerce, but is the ability to learn. You can't predict what's going to happen all the time, but do you have the ability to learn about a topic? Then, the best way to learn something is to teach it or to amplify it within an organization. And because of my, I talked about the basketball background, being a walk-on, that kind of humble servanthood. And I think when you're in e-com and other departments as well, but it's really about how do you navigate the relationships? How do you really understand, explain risk and reward to different teams? and understand, hey, this, especially when you are talking e-com or digital a lot of times, especially back then when I started, how do you explain this in a way that's not too much, but at the same time they get why it's important, right? There's almost the fear of missing out you have to think about. So I think what he saw was that willingness to work and learn. And when you think about it, he really took a chance. I was coming in with no e-commerce experience. I had never worked at Glambia, and I had no experience in the sports nutrition industry. So kind of a triple whammy. And oh, by the way, I had a 150-mile drive back and forth every day to that office.
Committed though.
Yeah, and what I said about that, because that's a concern, right? But I said, what I'm going to do about that drive is, one, not think about it, because it'd be terrible to think about every day of how long it is. But I use that as an opportunity, to listen to podcasts, to talk to people that were in the space already. So I really looked at it as a time to learn, because it gave me a lot of time in the car.
Yeah, I love it. You have this kind of naturally optimistic attitude toward life, I think, and this ability to learn. Did that come from your parents and the kind of the family and the upbringing? Did you always have that, or because it's something we all want, I think. And how do you find that in your day to day?
Yeah, I definitely, when I say I give the, credit to my parents and my upbringing, absolutely. I think just when I was a little kid and just finding solutions, right? It was always about finding a way or appreciate what you have. How do you help? How do you help my grandma and grandpa and helping them with things? It wasn't odd for me to, go help and find different chores to do, or find ways to, use my fast legs back in the day and help out. So yeah, I definitely think it's that, but I also think it does have to be a mindset. I'm not oblivious, even that 150-mile drive, I get it's not cool. It's not great. But if I thought about it that way every day, I would have dreaded it. And who knows how long I would have been there. But if you kind of pivot the other way, it's a lot better.
It's an opportunity.
Yeah.
It's a great insight. Well, you've got your current role now where you're heading up global digital commerce at Colgate-Palmolive. Would you tell us a little about that? What does the day-to-day look like for you?
Yeah, I mean, Colgate-Palmolive has so many talented people. It's really just exciting to find ways of how we're going to win together, how we're going to outcompete our competition. But I think from this global lens, it's really about how can we and the team. I'm on the team underneath our Chief Digital Officer, Brigitte King, and everyone that we have on our team. Small but mighty team. How do we find ways to get the local teams and division teams to share and solicit both best practices, what's going well, but also solicit when you need help, and that's okay, because we have so many talented people. There's probably a different geography that has tried it and maybe has a best practice or says, hey, don't do it this way. But also with that larger lens being on global, you can help connect some dots and connect different people, or even within departments. And, I think that's really key, because maybe a department's looking at it from their lens, and that's perfectly fine. But how do you make it a little bit more efficient by saying, well, this team's doing this, and I think this team could help out? That's really a benefit of a global team. And then bringing in, an outside in perspective. What is going on in the industry. And that's why, podcasts and webinars and share groups are so important. But how, it's not only just about, you can't just, fling a bunch of emails out and share everything without context. How do you do it that says, well, here's how this could help us, or maybe this provides you social proof for what you're doing already, or it provides some thought inspiration for something we weren't. So we're really just trying to look, how do we accelerate learnings, across multiple topics and multiple teams, and really be an advocate for those teams with their leadership, and try and support them as best we can.
When you think about working with different teams in, let's say you've got teams in the US, you've got teams in different markets around the globe, what are some of your takeaways or thoughts, advice for those of us navigating these global markets and these kind of global organizations?
Yeah, I think one thing is, as much as maybe global teams want to find one solution because it may be easier to implement across, right? It's so much work to talk different teams and get something implemented. But you really have to look at it, and maybe a solution can fit a lot of different geographies, but maybe there's a few that it won't, and that's okay. But I think as a global team member, you have to see that flexibility, and you really have to anticipate. All right, which teams are going to be advocates if you're trying to bring in a new tool, a new concept, whatever it may be, but also which ones aren't and why, and then how do you find a different solution there? I think the other thing being on a global team is also making it okay to, as you kind of, because you have that broader perspective, you can look at different angles, and whether you want to call it scorecarding or assessing or rack and stacking, whatever you want to call it, but it's okay to not all be green, right? If you're green on everything, that actually just delays. If there's if everything is green, then fine, but that's rare, right? So it's okay to be red and yellow because that allows us to get to the solution faster. So I think if as a global team you can make it that it's not punitive to share that something is red and yellow in a process or whatever it may be,
and now we can go figure it out.
Yeah, how can we figure it out together? We're not trying to pick on the past, it's about optimizing the future.
Yeah. Well, I got to ask you about one of the hottest topics and one of my favorite topics, of course, which is Gen AI, which you've been kind enough to share some really interesting posts on. Top of mind for everyone. What are you seeing there? Is it early days? Is it experimental? Are you seeing people, put it into practice? What's really happening?
Man, there's a lot out there, right? And I think one thing, even, and I'll speak just brand agnostic here, just in general. But I think if you're helping your organization try to figure this out, what should we be doing with generative AI? You have to be selective with what you send, because if you send everything and it's overwhelming, so be selective. Again, how does it apply to your company? But overall, I would say, one, stay very close with your legal, your brand, and your IT teams. On this topic, all the different layers should always be close to them, anyways. But with all things generative AI, I think it revisits maybe some processes that just Gen AI is putting amplification on, or a spotlight, whether it's around your data quality or data governance, right? Depending on what you're trying to do. But if your data quality isn't great, you're not, depending on what you're trying to do or what you're trying to build, it's not going to, give you these awesome outputs. It doesn't do it by itself. You think about, in your space, kind of with PDPs, content review processes, content creation processes. It may not be that Gen AI is creating situations. It may just be amplifying or, again, spotlighting them. So how do you look at who is reviewing it? How many people can? What are we trying to do? What do our brand style guideline, our style guides look like? Because you don't want to put the old ones in if you haven't tried to optimize it. So, there's a lot of there. But I think with Gen AI, it's really, you have to have a balance. You should be doing this in most things, but defining like the risk and the rewards, and people are that way anyways, right? They're either reward motivated or risk motivated. You got to play both. But and listen, humans always have to be in the loop on this. Like there is not a magic potion, but ChatGPT is a little over a year old now. I think it's really like, what are the use cases, though, is what people have to figure out. And don't create use cases. Figure out how it can solve ones you have already.
Yeah, it can apply. Yeah, on the PDP. Speaking of that, how are you? What kind of use cases are you seeing there? Are you seeing seasonal refreshes or volume, keywords, those kinds of things? And to your point, these are things we've always done kind of manually, and maybe the unlock is now I can relook at the process or the workflow.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of different options, and again, you have to stay close, and you have to make sure human in the loop on these. But yeah, you could look at copy first, and depending on your digital shelf provider, maybe you have your exception list of where titles or bullet points they're saying are not optimized, or you look at a report where you're not getting conversion rate, or maybe sales are down somewhere. So now you can look at your copy, and you can put through different prompts what you're looking to do, what keywords you want to optimize or what you want to infuse. And now it can suggest that at scale, right? And again, you still have to double check it. I think images have come along, right? I think at first it was mostly text. If we look over like the first year or so, but now Gen AI image generators are getting better. But now, so what are the prompts you're putting in though? You still have to figure out, how do I get my product in there? It's not great with words yet. So you still have to do that. But then again, what is that content review type of process? But I think the interesting thing here, and Amazon just announced their own. I would anticipate, a Gen AI tool for a select beta group of, I think, 1P vendors, right? If more of retailers start to have, image and or copy Gen AI tools themselves, I think brands have to think about, well, now how do I interact with that? Do I have to pay for this? Do I use theirs? Do I use ours? Do I use a public one? So, all these different things. And again, don't create bottlenecks on one end. You can't create all this content on one side and then not have enough people reviewing it on the other side, or not have enough people to, syndicate it to the retailers. There's always like these 5 points of failure in the content process. Either you don't have content, it's not in your PIM, it is in your PIM or DAM, but it's not categorized correctly. Then it's that's all good, but then you don't get it to the retailer, or then it was at the retailer and it dropped off for some reason, right? So.
Yeah, you're bringing back memories for me of this feature we built called Compare with Live, which let you check, is it really there? I thought it was there, but where did that content go? And so it's so true. But yeah, great perspective on this area.
Yeah, one other thing, Dave, though, I think it gives brands a big opportunity also to, to assess your competition maybe faster or at all, depending on your situation, where you could look at, what keywords are working or what images have they produced, and kind of look at it that way, right? So I think that's always, sometimes helpful to compare and contrast to your competitors or even outside your categories.
Yeah, so true. Now you also get to spend a lot of time with the customer in this case being the retailer. And one of the questions we often get is, you have a brand that maybe wants to have creative this way. The retailer has their standards and style guides. And so when you're thinking about these new tools, for creating content, how are you seeing brands kind of navigate, and their retailer partners navigate that balance between the site experience and that creative flexibility, or that the brand qualities and image that they want to get in front of the shopper?
Yeah, I mean, this is a fun one because it's starting to differentiate itself a little bit. But I think if you do have a foundation of looking at your digital shelf, no matter who the provider is, you've probably been looking at quantitative measurements, right? You kind of mentioned the retailers, and more retailers now have their retailer, digital shelf scorecards or content scorecards. On that part, I think the conversation has been, all right, well, how do you educate the internal team? So one, you have to learn it if you're on the digital commerce team, let's say. But then how do you work with whoever is in charge of content creation? So your creative team, your brand team, and then that balance of, well, it's not just conversion focus we're looking for. It's brand building, conversion focus. Really, the consumer decides that. It's not brands anymore, right? If someone's inspired, they do it. If they're not, they may come back to it. But I think it's also important, there's different types of PDP content as well. I would say there's kind of four things. There's new for innovation, right? Innovation products. There's refreshes, whether it's packaging, claims, whatever it may be. And then probably the two that don't get enough attention, and this is where the opportunity is, would be optimizing your existing content based on data, whether that's consumer trends, the retailer perspective, right? The retailer scorecard. Maybe you've negotiated some keywords from them or whatever it may be. So I think the optimized piece is big. And then also, who's purging the old stuff out, right? So that you don't accidentally, syndicate the old packaging, the old content. But I talked about the style guides before. I think those can really be an opportunity, especially if now you go from adding to your digital shelf quantitative methods and measurements, but now have a qualitative way to assess your PDPs, yours and your competitors. And if you can do that, now you can go to those style guides and say, well, here's a little bit more data to it. but it's still coming from a creative lens, right? It's still like this is the image. We're just trying to connect and convert the consumer, not one or the other. So, this is a fun space, but sometimes the retailers push brands to move a little bit faster.
Yeah, yeah, I love it. It's a great point on these style guides, because if you do a bit of that upfront work, then in fact you can sort of get more flexibility in a way, because you know where the framework is, and then you can really go execute. So yeah, I think it's a great point. Speaking of different formats, we've seen a lot of interest in video. It used to be just on a few sites, and now it's, you've got it on Instacart, you've got it on a number of different sites. What are you seeing there, and how are brands tackling the creation and the video that they want to include in their content strategy?
Yeah, I think this is again where the retailers are kind of pushing the brands a little bit, because you look at retailers and the physical stores now will start. There's a lot of screens in there, right? And yes, there's been screens in the past, but there's also being used now in different ways, right? With like in-store retail media, or literally PDP content is showing up now inside of screens. There's audio and there's apps as well, like in-store navigation apps, things like that. So yeah, there's all these different specs, and you have to really be flexible with the team, or with your creative teams of again educating, and whether it's a cooler screen, whether it's a shopping cart, smart cart screen, whatever it may be. But I think the thing that's interesting is how much more scrutiny and important will a PDP be now if it starts showing up inside the physical store locations. And maybe because it's a small part of our business, if you don't believe in digitally influenced sales, which you should by now, but if those that don't, fine, we'll get there. But if those PDPs are showing up on an end cap screen at a major retailer, I think it's going to put a lot more focus on the PDP. Now, how do you balance, though, inside a physical store location, or even them holding their phone, of how many pop-ups come if it's like some kind of tags? What is that balance of the consumer accepting and finding it relevant versus being, I think Minority Report is always the example that's too much, right? Where it's just everywhere. But I think one category outside of like CPG, like the fast food chains, right? At least in the US, the digital penetration is so high. And I just wonder, do they do a better job of content creation, relevancy, right? Whether it's, you don't have to wait in line at let's say a Starbucks or a Chipotle, or you get a lot of deals, the McDonald's one. Is there things that CPGs and other categories can learn from fast food? Because I don't think they don't get enough credit for how much they're doing with their apps and digital penetration.
Yeah, and yet they've done a great job, because you go there, and of course I've already ordered, because I didn't even think about it, because that's the way to do it. So you've got kind of the content strategy, and I really like this point, which is around, I mean, even the PDP now showing up in the store is like kind of a remarkable change on how you might think about the importance of these different elements of content. You've also got now retail media, of course, at the top of the funnel. And what are you seeing there, I guess, in terms of the market, but also in terms of how are the organizations being structured? Because at least historically, media and maybe the digital shelf have had a little bit of overlap, but have not been in contact the way I think they are being put in contact today.
I think retail media is one where there's no maybe right answer yet, and there's not a consistent way of what brands are doing. Talking in share groups and hearing from a lot of brands, it's really all over the board. But I think maybe the three most common places it gets put, retail media is either sales, shopper marketing, or brand marketing, right? We'll just call it. But in all three of those, retail media so far is still always going to be second place, right? It's going to be second place to trade spend in the sales team. It's going to be second place to in-store activations with the shopper team. And it's going to be second place to pretty much every other kind of media with the brand marketing team. And not saying that's right or wrong. Everyone makes their own choices. And I'm not saying maybe there's obviously outliers out there. But where does it break through to be either at the same level, right? Or maybe pulls ahead. So probably the JBP, like, the joint business plan is going to be the opportunity. Again, if retailers are, hey, bring everyone together, let's figure this out. Obviously, really since 2020 and COVID, everyone, a lot of retailers have added their own retail media networks. So is that going to be the mechanism to really figure out where should this be? How do we fund it? And I think a couple of things have to happen. It's one, you have to look at your, let's just say, legacy investments and maybe have the same scrutiny that you do on retail media. Is this working? Is this incremental? Am I paying too much? Not. Where should I spend it? How should I spend it? And look at those, all really investments and say, okay, where are we getting our best bang for our buck per se? And then, it's going to be tough because I think if you look at like from an org structure standpoint, probably changes would have to be, some people raise their hand and say, I'm going to give up some power and headcount and budget for the greater good of the company. And, that's probably not as common in all organizations, right? For someone, for a lot of people to do that. But again, I think this is one where if you follow where the shopper is and you see how they're interacting, and what, retail media has been kind of oddly defined, or, is that the right name for it? But now with all these partnerships, alignments with social media, it really gets interesting. These blurred lines become, really messy now.
Let me ask you about one other area. You were mentioning JBPs, and I think that's a very unique opportunity in the ecosystem. On the other end of that, you have, let's say, a retailer like Amazon, where it is more algorithmic and it is more about what's showing up. And how do you navigate the different customer night dynamics where you can build those relationships and so on here, but you may have some challenges when it comes to the indexing or the algorithm in other parts of the ecosystem?
A couple of things. One, this is where hiring people that are curious and can adapt come into play, right? So if you look on the algorithm side, well, then you really have to figure it out and who's winning. Hopefully you have some human contact, but how can you make sure that you're part of a beta or get whatever data back that you can, or making the right investments, not just the first thing that's offered necessarily, but how do you really outcompete the competition? I think on the other side where there are JBPs, I think the variation is, well, follow the lead of your buyer at your retailer. Are they one group? Like, is it truly omni-channel that brick and mortar and online is together? Or are they separate? If they're separate, well then, how do you help bring them together? Or if they want one point of contact from your company, then you have to work a little bit more internally for that one person. Or if they want the group to come together but not separate, that's probably a little bit of a change at most places. But this is, again, one where it's not one way is going. You can't say, like, here's the way to do JBPs anymore. It's really not. But I think you have to build flexibility into them as well, right? Just a little bit over a year ago, we weren't talking generative AI. There's always something you're like, oh, 1 year it was voice, 1 year it was, sponsored videos, 1 year it was connected TV, QR codes, whatever. How do you have flexibility in these so that you're not, sunk costs with your investments?
Now, I know we're headed into looking at the future here, but I did want to ask you about QR codes. You had done kind of an interesting study, I think, of ads and adoption of QR codes. Will you take a minute and just talk about what your kind of learnings were there?
Just in general, I think, I'll go to the NFL Black Friday game that was a little bit ago. And looking at QR codes. And I think it's, looking at that, and I was sitting there and, tracking all the commercials to see, because, one, this was first time ever Amazon had a game on Black Friday and all the hype around it. And what was Amazon going to do with it? Obviously, they have Thursday Night Football. And I guess it depends on your perspective. It was about, roughly 30 out of about 122 commercials that I tracked had a QR code or some kind of interactive, way of consumers to engage. And I guess on one side, you could be a little bit disappointed. I was like, only 30? Like, that doesn't seem like a lot, especially for this game. But on the other side, again, maybe a year ago, outside of the Super Bowl, if you would have said an NFL game would have, about a quarter of its ads with a QR code, you probably, as a digital person, or just, anyone that understands kind of connecting with consumers, you would have been, yeah, that's great. That's impressive. But I think it was also interesting how they were used, right? Some use it just to direct them to your, let's say, an Amazon brand store page, which was great. Some were a deal at that time, right? And then like a post game, they had a deal where it was only for the next, 20 or 30 minutes, whatever it was. It's going to be interesting to see from that learning. And people have talked about the retargeting just of, from a connected TV perspective, but for QR codes, how do we really get, as a brand, how do we really get creative with those? I think last year's Super Bowl was the Coinbase one that was bouncing around the screen, right? And then it crashed the system. So many people did it, but just having it on the screen, yeah, still relatively new. But as that becomes more common,
how do you differentiate?
Yeah.
It's great. I love your kind of analytical approach to these, because it's not just taking it at whatever was said, but I love how you look at the actual ads and say, okay, yeah, I did check them, and here's how to think about it. I think you have a tremendous number of really great insights. One that really resonated for me is something you said, which is plan for pivots, not perfection. Would you tell us a little about that and how marketers can be putting that to work?
Yeah, I'll start with, if you play poker, I think if you plan for perfection, the equivalent would be getting pocket aces every hand. That doesn't happen, right? You have to figure out the pivots, which is, can you win in poker with a 2 and a 9? Can you figure out a way to win, right? And so the plan for pivots and not perfection can apply to really anything. And, I even had, t-shirts. I didn't have to make these. I actually found these on Woot, but they were called Progress Over Perfection, which is, a variation of the plan for pivots, not perfection. It doesn't mean that you should expect everything to fail necessarily, but if you can identify the points of failure ahead of time, it probably makes your primary plan, stronger. And I just think if people spend more time on processing the information, the learnings from all the kind of different ways we mentioned, versus creating the perfect process, and then when it goes bad, you have to start all over again. That can be really deflating for a team. It's more about solutions than a whole bunch of slides, right? Don't just bombard people with slides. Like, find solutions, talk with people, help them. Not saying that you can't do a few, but it shouldn't be the focus on, is the deck perfect, is the font right? No, it should be, how are we helping people? I think plan for pivots, not perfection, also means you motivate people versus mandating them to do something. And one line that I like is, can you think about whatever your initiative is, have teams get something out of it so that it's like quality based versus just getting it out, which is more time based, right? Like, sometimes just the big email or launch of something can be the end for some processes. And it's like, no, that's the beginning. How do you make sure the teams are getting something out of it? So I think also, if you amplify that, the plan for pivots, not perfection, people will be more willing to try things that maybe they weren't comfortable with in the past. They'll be more curious to learn different ways, because it's not just about, again, making everything a green scorecard. So I think it can be, really applied anywhere. And thank you for mentioning it.
Yeah, it's a great insight. Something I really take to heart. You have this really wonderful perspective on the industry. I'd love it if you would share a few of your takeaways, your learnings for marketers working in the space.
It's a people business, right? How can you find ways to connect with people? And that's different for, people learn in different ways. People connect in different ways. The timing is different. So maybe when you launch something or share something, it's not going to resonate at that time. But if you can have, whatever your systems are, but have kind of like an on-demand set of resources, articles, podcasts, webinar links, whatever it may be, help them when they're ready, right? So when they come and say, hey, I think you've talked about this, or what do you know about this topic? Not only can you talk to them, but then you can maybe give them a little bit of follow-up, information, if they really are curious to learn. If you can, especially if you're in marketing, find a way to gamify it. I think if you gamify it and make quizzes, whether you have Slack or Google Chat or whatever it may be, like make it a little bit fun, right? And assume like you're not going to get a lot of engagement maybe at first, but find ways to make it fun. But I think the other thing is if you ask people for information, if you ask people for their time, do something with it. Don't waste it. And don't, if you know something more than a different group, don't burn them because you know more and take a shortcut for something. Like have a foundation of trust, be open, so you can really build, advocates within your organization.
Well, I've really enjoyed some of the topics and the ideas we've talked about today. Would love to hear your thoughts. You're looking ahead for the next 12, 24, maybe even 36 months. What are some of the opportunities that you're thinking about?
How can you speed up your decision making processes? Quote I like is change has never happened this fast and it'll never be this slow again. And it kind of always feels like that's true every year, right? And you kind of think back like, oh, so much easier back then when it was slower. But at that time it was really fast. But I think, from an organization standpoint and individually, how can you make quality decisions faster, right? Obviously PDPs, the content, the ways of working, everything we said there. Don't forget your supply chain. Like we probably haven't talked enough about the importance of supply chain and working with them, working on the forecast, explaining to them, like, we talked about retail media, or when you make changes in content, if you think that's going to increase it, or you're putting more funding towards something, really work with your supply chain folks to help them out. And then, we've talked a lot about learning. I think there's also a need for unlearning departments. How do you unwire some ways that maybe aren't as effective anymore or aren't as needed? Because time is always the factor that is a reason, and it's a valid reason why someone didn't have time to learn something or engage with something or adopt a new tool. So how do you help teams unlearn? And then I just think there's something I like saying, it's like the 5 A's. No matter what we do in terms of launching something or bringing something new to people, there's like, it's awareness, acceptance, adoption, advocacy, and adjustment. And no matter where you are, you're going to be, different people are going to be in all different ways of that. But if you get them to be advocates and then adjusting, right? I'm evolving. I'm not just, keeping the knowledge. If it changed, then I'm adjusting. But I think if you kind of think of those 5 A's, no matter what topic you have, you can kind of see where people are on that curve.
I'd love to ask you a couple of quick questions before we wrap up. First, and I know it's hard to narrow it down to two, but what two people have inspired you the most in your professional life?
Well, I'll cheat a little bit. I did mention Matt Goodson before, so I definitely want him. But I would say also, when I was just getting out of college and someone took a chance on me, Lori Newton Anderson was one of my first bosses, at, let's say a real job per se. Nothing wrong with the other ones, but she was fantastic in guiding me of how to be in the corporate world, of really how to look at things, trust but verify, using data back then. This is all brick and mortar things, how to negotiate. I mean, Lori Newton Anderson was incredible. And then, I kind of cheat with a bonus one. A middle school teacher, it was like an AP class, and he had a question about, give me at least 3 examples. And everyone gave 3 great examples, and he gave everyone a C. And everyone was like, what are you doing? We gave 3 examples. And he's like, yeah, I said at least. He goes, you gave me the least. You're lucky you got a C. And that has stuck with me since 8th grade. And it really, amplified. He's like, you should have gave 4, 5, 6 examples if you wanted an A. Phil Glisson was his name. So gotta give him credit.
Love it. Love it. Well, outside of work and family, what are some of your favorite hobbies?
Yeah, I mean, I like keeping close with people I've worked directly with. People I want to give out shout outs to, like Drew Donnelly, Ashley Zhao, Ian Forrester, Elisa Levinsky, Rini, and Gina Lee. All places I've been or have now, and I love just connecting with them when I can. But I have 2 young boys, Jake and Alex. They're 9 and 6, so you can imagine full of activities with them. I like pickup basketball. Don't get to do it enough, so I exercise with the exercise coach. Great chain, 20-minute workouts. They're fantastic. And I think giving back and helping, and again, this is where my parents came in. But volunteer where we can. Right now it's like feed my starving children, because we can take the kids to help out with that. But I've been lucky enough in my past. I've been a Make-A-Wish grantor. I've been a Meals on Wheels delivery driver, and those are really, they just fill your bucket, as we tell our kids. So yeah.
Well, Todd, if people want to get in touch with you online, what's the best way for them to find you?
I think it's always the LinkedIn, right? But I'd say, hey, like if you have a great volunteer activity and we're local, let's figure something out. Maybe that's a little different answer than the common LinkedIn one.
Todd, thanks so much for taking time to speak with me today.
No, thank you so much, and thank you for having this podcast.
Thanks for listening to the show. If you like what you heard, please visit our website at itsrapid.ai, where you can find out more about how we're helping leading brands like PepsiCo save thousands of hours a year when it comes to retail media and digital shelf content creation. And don't forget to subscribe to hear more great episodes of Beyond the Shelf. See you next time.